am so looking forward to this next episode. If you saw from the end of my last review, I am absolutely giddy about this episode. Because, number one, this episode premiered on my birthday, so that was a really great birthday present from Hasbro and DHX. And number two, this is the episode where we finally learn about something that the fandom has been asking, had been asking for years, 6 seasons prior, the status of Applejack's parents. And number three, as I said at the end of the last review, I consider this to be the best episode of Season 7. So let's get into the Perfect Pear. So this episode starts out with Apple Bloom walking around in the market where she basically comes across an old pony.
Originally from here.
Oh.
I'm Grand Pear.
What?
Yeah, so she basically goes to the market and meets an old pony named Grand Pear.
You mean welcome back to Ponyville. Grand Pear was originally from here before he opened his famous Pear Jam store in Vancouver.
Vancouver. Well, immediate points for once again MLP exploring more of this universe, because Vancouver, I'm assuming, would be Vancouver. And oh my god, I've watched 31 seasons of The Amazing Race and I do not know where Vancouver is. I want to say Canada, but I suck at geography on the short term when I need to.
Really? Why'd you move back?
I needed a change of pace.
Oh, by the way, before we get into it any further, I think I do need to point out our special guest star here for the MLP universe. The character of Grand Pear is voiced by Captain Kirk from Star Trek himself, William Shatner. Yes, you heard right. Right. There is so much giddiness coming from me. I mean, obviously the thing is, get it out of the way, I am not the biggest Star Trek fan in the world. I only really know, I just know William Shatner of that of word of mouth, but I also know him for voicing the voice of Ozzy the Opossum in the DreamWorks movie Over the Hedge. But, yeah, apparently Hasbro and DHX were able to get a hold of William Shatner and get a voice him for a character in the show. And the reason for that, obviously, from what I heard, is that William Shatner is an equestrian, but it turns out he's become the brony. So when the fandom is able to succeed in getting Captain Kirk himself to be the brony, we have succeeded. So Apple Bloom essentially buys a jar of pears from the market and brings it back home, only for Applejack and Big Mac to get, well, antsy. So they try to hide it, and after the theme song, Apple Bloom pretty much explains why are they acting so paranoid.
Pear Jam? The big deal is that there is a long-standing feud between the apples and the pears.
Yep.
Well, this is the first time I'm hearing about this, considering that 6 seasons prior we never even knew about the pears.
Why?
Why? Well, actually, I'm not really sure.
So another immediate point is that this really could have been exactly what happened with either Super Size Squeezy 6000 and Where the Apple Lies, and any other episode where pretty much the adult ponies are morons and just try to cover it up. For once, we see that Applejack and Big Mac really don't know the reason why, which begs the question why exactly they haven't asked Granny Smith.
We should ask Granny? Ask me what? Wait, those rings.
But thankfully, a immediate point of that is that they basically, Applejack and Big Mac pretty much answer why they can't just ask Granny Smith right out of the gate.
Listen, Sugar Chew. Anytime Big Mac and I ever asked Granny about the feud or the pears, she'd get so upset she couldn't talk. Best not bring it up.
So yeah. So immediately the episode, any potential plot holes that this episode brings up and any questions, the episode squashes immediately, and it seems for good reason. It adds a lot of weight, and the gears start turning around. So instead, and because Applejack and Big Mac are just as curious as Apple Bloom, they decide to go and speak with Golden Delicious to figure out what the feud is.
Well, anyway, it's so wonderful to see you three. To what do I owe the pleasure?
Well, if she knew, then she probably would be here too. But then again, if it's Granny Smith, it's got to be serious.
No, ma'am. But I ran into Grandpa yesterday, and he was real nice. Maybe the feud was a misunderstanding or something, and we can fix it.
Well, if it's a so yeah, you could probably see this sounds somewhat familiar for what happened to the Hooffields and the McCults back in season 5. It could have been something like that, but thankfully this episode's not there. But essentially, Golden Delicious essentially finds the book and explains the backstory about the pairs, where it turns out they were living right next door to Sweet Apple Acres, and then basically there was competition between a younger Granny Smith and a younger Grand Pear.
Next to a green apple on a beautiful fall day.
Unless, of course, you could find into a juicy pear.
Please, pears are just what happens when you ain't no good at farming apples.
Pears are nature's candy. Apples are sour.
Well, it depends on the type of apples, and honestly, I gotta admit, I wasn't really sure about pears for the longest time, but recently I found myself eating them a lot, and they're actually really good. But yeah, essentially, this is where the whole feud started, where a young Granny Smith and a young Grand Pear, though he's not really grand, I don't know what he's going to be called back there, but essentially, this is where the rivalry started, which is basically a business rivalry between apples and pears. And unlike Super Squeezy 6000, where it was super cartoony, over the top, and everyone was hit with the moron stick, the progression here of competition and rivalry actually made sense.
We're always at each other. Who's the best farmer? Who's the best tear down trees?
While pissing off and making the customers go away.
Granny read to her trees at night?
Yeah, and essentially, the rivalry even continues outside the business, where Granny Smith basically tells bedtime stories to the tree, which I'm assuming is not far-fetched, considering what we saw with Applejack and Over a Barrel way back in Season 1. And to combat this, Grand Pear puts blankets over the trees. It kind of makes you wonder, how is he able to get the blankets back down? And even the families that help out have this rivalry. It's pretty much so intense that everybody pretty much hates each other, except for two little ponies, named Bright Macintosh and Pear Butter.
I'm not supposed to talk to you.
I'm not supposed to talk to you either.
My mom says if you hold a buttercup under your chin, it'll make your chin glow. But it doesn't work on me.
Well, it's nice to see the young pony designs again, though it is kind of weird. If they're supposed to be like, what, 1, 2, they're not supposed to be talking. But eventually during that story, Applejack comes to the realization about that.
Buttercup? Those are our parents' names.
Of course, Buttercup was just a nickname your father gave your mother. Pear Butter. Well, that was her given name.
Are you saying our mother was a pear?
Well, that's our first bombshell of the episode. So yeah, it turns out that Bright Macintosh and Pear Butter are Applejack, Apple Bloom, and Big Mac's parents, and that these 3 apples are actually half pear. So that is the first bomb of the episode that has been dropped.
So we are half pear?
I can't believe it. How do we not know?
Well, nobody called your mother Pear Butter. And if Cutie Mark was a preserve job, the Pear Butter don't look too much different from Apple Butter, so who knows who was there.
Is there anything else?
So yeah, so essentially Golden Delicious' story lays kind of the groundwork of how the feud started, how Pear Butter and Bright Macintosh basically met, and then having the apples come to the realization that they're actually half pear. But unfortunately, Golden Delicious is unable to get a book that would explain more,
Gave volume 138 for that.
which is guarded by, I want to say, a cheetah. So it now kind of raises the question where Golden Delicious actually kept the cheetah. So I guess she's more than just an insane cat lady. But essentially, she basically goes.
All right, Goldie. It was nice just to hear.
I just remembered something. Your dad and his buddy Burnt Oak would get in all kinds of trouble together as colds.
So essentially, now Golden Delicious tells the apples to basically go see. a new character of the show named Burnt Oak, who basically chops wood for a living and has a timber cutie mark. And so when they confront him...
I know you're not here for firewood. You got more trees than any pony in Ponyville.
And I really like his voice. He really sounds like a cool, down-to-earth type of character.
You're right, but we're not here for that.
Come to ask about your dad? Yup. I wondered if you might. Hoped you would. It's nice to talk about.
Okay, alright, I think pretty much everybody in the fandom has already brought this up, and I think we've been kind of tiptoeing around the issue, but let's kind of get into it and just rip that Band-Aid off. So, there's been something that the fandom had been asking 6 seasons prior to this episode, wondering where Applejack's parents are. Because throughout the series, we saw Pinkie Pie and Twilight's parents first in the Cutie Mark Chronicles in Season 1. Then we saw Rarity's parents first in Sisterhood Soul in Season 2. We then met Fluttershy's parents and Flutter Brother, regrettably in Season 6. And then recently we saw Rainbow Dash's parents in parental guidance. But we never knew about the Apple's parents. We never knew about Applejack's parents. And there have been a lot of signs that... Well, let's just get to the 2 big signs for the explanation. Firstly, a lot of people asked of 2 shooting stars that were shown off during Applejack's contemplation at Apple Family Reunion in Season 3. And then the line in Christina's of the Lost Mark when Apple Bloom got her cutie mark, where Applejack said, if Ma and Dad were here, they would be so proud. So, and the way that the characters talk about them, it's pretty much heavily implied that Bright Macintosh and Pear Butter are dead. That's pretty much the biggest implication. And a lot of people have pretty much been asking about this, and pretty much some of the staff, that, from what I've read, have confirmed that Hasbro has a thing where they can't really address the death of family members or even death in general. Even though in the Transformers Unicron trilogy they showed plenty of deaths of scarring children, with the deaths of Optimus Prime and Starscream in Transformers Armada, Inferno's death and Shock Blast in Six Shots Deck and Energon, and lastly Vector Prime's death in Transformers Cybertron. So you can figure it out there. But essentially the production had to find some workarounds so they can try to address the episode. So, yeah, basically getting to the point, the way that the characters talk about Applejack's parents, it's pretty much heavily implied that her parents are dead. So, yeah, let's rip that Band-Aid off. So, anyways, Burnt Oak basically explains the story of what Bright Macintosh was like when he was older, where essentially he was show office, but essentially was so love-struck that he crashed over into the Pear's water silo, where at first Pear Butter gets blamed for it, but Bright Mac basically steps forward to Grand Pear and explains himself.
The water silo. It was my fault. Well, you owe me a new silo, boy. You? Come with me. No daughter of mine is going to make cuckoo eyes and an apple.
Yeah, and you may have also noticed one other thing is that essentially the way that the rivalry with the Apples and the Pears is being explained is very Romeo and Juliet-esque vibes.
Grand Pear never would have known it was your father's fault. But there was no way he'd let your mother take the blame for something he did.
So Dad was super honest. Apple doesn't fall far from a tree, huh?
Yeah. And then, so basically, since we see a lot of the episode focused on Bright Mac and Pear Butter, we see where the inherent traits of the 3 Apple siblings come from. Where we see that Applejack inherits Bright Mac's super honesty.
Honest, Jack.
Your dad worked the apple farm. farm all day and then headed over to Pear's on his breaks to fix the water silo. I didn't see him for weeks. Not that he minded. Gave him a chance to get to know your mom.
Did you know our mom, too?
Yeah. So essentially, unfortunately, the burnt oak doesn't really know much about pear butter, but believe it or not, they then go on to talk to Mrs. Cake. Yeah. But before we leave, we do get to see this nice little interaction from Big Mac.
Would it be okay if we stopped by him sometime to hear more stories? I'd like that very much.
You can tell that Big Mac really wants to know more about his dad, especially considering we see that his physique has taken a lot after him. So they basically then go on to see Mrs. Cake.
Well, cinnamon sugar on toast. All 3 apple siblings. Hi, Mrs. Cake. We heard you and our ma used to be real good friends, and we were hoping you could tell us a bit about it.
Oh, I would love to. I never knew the right time to bring it up, but I'm so glad you came. For starters, did you all know that it was your mom who convinced me to pursue baking? What isn't your name, Mrs. Cake?
And this episode is another thing. It addresses the situation with the whole surnames when ponies get married. I know it was kind of talked about with the filthy rich and spoiled rich situation, but honestly, I never really pretty much paid mind to it, considering how much disdain I have for spoiled rich, or by name. But this is what we find out with Mrs. Cakes.
Not always. Back when I was Chiffon Swirl.
So her original name was Chiffon Swirl, but then once she got married to Mr. Cake, she basically took up her surname. I don't know the ins and outs of taking these surnames in Equestria, but honestly, this is all really good world building, and it just gives this episode more and more points for me to talk about.
I had no idea.
But essentially, Mrs. Cake didn't really know what she wanted to do, but Pear Butter actually encouraged her to try to bake, and she ended up making a cake, and she ended up earning her cutie mark, and
Or rather, you're just like her.
And it basically Pear Butter's instincts of basically helping ponies try to find out their true talents is pretty much essentially what Apple Bloom inherited from her, especially what we got to know from her now.
That was the first of many cakes for me, and Buttercup was with me through it all. She did my taste testers, helped with the decorating, and prepped new ingredients. Over the years, I perfected my recipes. Your mom did so much for me. One day, I wanted to surprise her with a cake.
The typical awkward first date. But yeah, essentially what Mrs. Cakes was essentially spying on basically Pear Butter and Bright Mac's first date, as I'm just gonna say it right now, they're just freaking adorable. But it really just goes to show how in love they are with each other. But Granny Smith does catch them and is not really too pleased because, again, it's essentially the rivalry that's just getting more and more heated, and really, because Granny Smith and, by extension, Grandpa are the heads of the family, they're pretty much stuck in their ways. But that doesn't stop them from basically still making faces at each other.
I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Your families hate each other.
I think hate is an understatement.
I can't help it. We just sort of happen. Then Pear Butter told me the sweetest love story I have ever heard.
Happy 131,456-hour anniversary, darling.
I think a lot of people need to be more like Bright Mac. If he's able to remember something that good for an anniversary for a date, they need to be more like him.
What? That's way longer than we've been together.
I know. but it's the anniversary of the first time I called you Buttercup. It's okay if you didn't get me anything.
So essentially, the Pear Butter pulls out a guitar that she basically didn't think that...
Oh, for me? But I don't know how to play.
Quiet, you.
See, their chemistry is just so friggin' adorable because you could totally tell that they are in love. And unfortunately, this does get into our next song of the season, and Love You Like a Catchy Song. Now, the song itself, yes, it is cheesy, yes, it is cliche, yes, it's like every single love song that has ever existed, but you just get so much giddy from it that you can't help but smile when you hear the lyrics, and on top of that, you see how heated the arguments are, but you see how Bright Mac and Pear Butter do everything they can to basically slip away to be together whenever chance they get. And you can tell they are really in love with each other. And now this is the perfect time to talk about soundtracks. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I've made this clear that I'm not a huge fan of this, but apparently after season 5, it seems like that the show just stopped releasing songs onto the show's soundtrack. They were able to do it for songs for the first 5 seasons, but then all of a sudden, they just stopped releasing the songs on iTunes. I don't know why they did that. I don't know if it was a rights issue or something like that, but for whatever reason, they never released any of the songs from seasons 6, 7, 8, or 9 onto iTunes, which is where I usually find my music. And as much as I would like to play the full song like I did in my old reviews, you already know my history of how if I play the full song, my whole review is going to get copyright claimed, and I would just start the whole review all over again, so fuck you, Hasbro. Alright, but after that long-winded diatribe, essentially during the song, Pear Butter accidentally lets it slip that she's falling for Bright Mac.
Hey, no fair. I was going to tell you the same thing.
And then Bright Mac basically takes her to a stone carving of their cutie marks and a heart together.
And I'd say, I love you. Too bad it didn't work out, though.
Yep, too bad.
Alright. So, remember when I said that this episode is very Romeo and Julie-esque type of thing? Well, obviously minus the death. Well, it essentially comes torn asunder when basically Bran Pear tells Pear Butter that the Pears are moving, and as we've learned, they have moved to Vancouver.
Hoover? But that's so far.
It's what's best. There's acres of untouched land and a warehouse to make our jams. We'll get to expand our business and get away from those gosh darn apples.
I think, by the way, since I mentioned the guest star, I should probably mention this, but William Shatner as Grand Pear has been freaking great. Where we got to see the tenderly old man that we saw him in the present, but even despite him for his age at the time, I'm trying to think. I think William Shatner's about 90, 91 in 2023, and this episode came out in 2018, so he would probably have to been 88 or 87. But even then, he was still able to get the range where we do get to hear him as the present Grand Pear, but we see how well we get the emotions out of him as the younger, or rather, middle-aged Grand Pear. So essentially, there's one more story to tell, as basically Bright Mac comes up with a plan, and the apples actually go on to see Mayor, who, believe it or not, officiated their wedding. As essentially before they left, basically Bright Mac put on a secret wedding.
I don't want to be apart from you, ever. I'm not sure what we'll do, but I'm sure of us. So sure that I'd marry you today.
I would too.
Oh yeah, and also this episode gets another good point for continuity because we get to see in this flashback that Mayor actually had pink hair, actually keeping in continuity from Ponyville Confidential that Mayor actually had pink hair. But then that kind of raises the question of that episode, why would she bother trying to dye it Great. Does she want to appear like she's old? It really comes up with a lot of secrets that essentially you really just want to ask. So essentially the wedding goes off without a hitch, as they basically form their own vows, as Mayor explains.
Splash. Reminds me of... Right about you, Buttercup, wouldn't want to big splash.
Reminds me of somebody else I know.
Yeah, and essentially this is then we see where it all leads back to where Big Mac got his characteristics from. He essentially got it from his dad, who essentially didn't want to make big waves and make a big deal of things, which essentially where Big Mac got his basically hard-working attitude and just basically wanting not to make any big scene of anything. So the wedding goes off without a hitch, but essentially the two get caught by their respective heads, but they basically stand up for each other and say that they are married, as Mayor officially makes them husband and bride.
Doesn't that feel nice?
What are you talking about? Married? You two can't be married.
What?
Well, it's kind of too late. Well, it's kind of too late when the officiator already calls you husband and bride, and on top of that, you don't really have any say in the matter.
I mean, something we can agree. Pear, Butter, enough of this nonsense. We're moving. You gotta stick with your family.
But the apples are my family now, too.
Oh boy. And let's just say now this leads into the saddest scene of the episode. If you followed my Instagram when I did my MLP 30-day challenge back when I was still reviewing Season 5, this upcoming scene is what I actually talked about for its saddest moment. Because, let's be honest, it is really freaking sad, Ed. But I'll get into that more. Essentially, we're now at the point where, well, now that she's officially married to Bright Mac, Pear Butter is pretty much now officially an apple. But we see that Granny Smith actually basically drops her attitude as soon as Pear Butter basically says it, because she knows that Pear Butter's part of the family and she has to accept it. So we see that Granny Smith is actually being willing to drop her pride. Grandpear, on the other hand...
You can't be serious. Are you choosing to be an apple over being a pear?
Well, because apples are way better.
Are you making me choose?
Yes, I am.
Then yeah, I guess I am.
Fine.
I really got to admit, even to this day, William Shatner's read on Fine, no matter how many times I've watched this episode, it still gets a shock out of me. Because, basically, this is pretty much the equivalent of saying to a family member, "You're dead to me."
When did this get so freaking sad?
I think it's probably the reaction everybody has had after watching this in this moment.
I can't believe Grandpear just up and let go like that.
No wonder Granny never told us about any of this.
These things are never easy.
And it's hard to know when it is a good time.
It seems to me that now's as good a time as any to talk to both our grandparents.
So yeah, so after learning everything, the Apple siblings then pick up with Grandpear, as essentially we got to see what they're like.
Did you really move to Ponyville just for a change of pace?
No.
Then you came here because you're sorry and you want to get to know us too?
I'm so sorry. I was just so angry. But I never...
It's in the past.
So yeah, just hearing William Shatner read those few lines really indicates how much regret Pear Butter had after snapping at his daughter. And considering how I said earlier that the show really implies that Bright Mac and Pear Butter are dead, it really kind of comes full circle for Pear, where he's pretty much regretted saying that stuff for the rest of his life. I think probably the thing that he's thinking about is essentially what Mondo Owada has said, I think, after he says fine, and then he finds out that his daughter was killed, which, by the way, we never do find out what actually happened to them from there on out. I mean, yeah, we know that they're dead, but we never really know what the cause of death was. But I'm sure after finding out his daughter died, I think Mondo said it best.
Thanks to that, I did something I can never take back.
That was probably something he was probably thinking about ever since finding out what happened to his daughter, and has regretted it ever since. So we see that the Apple siblings are willing to want to get Grandparent to know him better, and they confront Granny Smith about what happened and get the two of them together.
Never should have left.
Finding you and learning all about Mom and Dad, I feel like I found a piece of me I didn't even know was missing.
Hearing their story makes me feel closer to them somehow.
I'm sorry. I should have told you all about him sooner.
And I should have been here. I can't believe I let the silly feud keep me from my family.
Nothing's keeping you from us now.
Let's not miss anything else. Applejack's right.
And we're not even done with the saddest part, as essentially they take the grandparents to where their parents essentially buried the apple and pear seeds, and we see pretty much an apple and pear tree tied together.
It's beautiful.
It's impossible.
If anything's gonna make it through, it's apples and pears.
I'm not crying! Not!
I think that pretty much describes everybody after watching this episode. So, yeah, that was the perfect pair. You know what? That's it. This is the best episode ever. Cue the song and dance. I mean, really, I really don't know what else I have to say about this episode. It is so phenomenal. The simple slice of life story, wondering more about the Apple's backstory, finally knowing about their parents, what it was like for them, and then seeing Grandparent and Granny Smith reconcile with one another. Just the amount of world building and everything that this episode brings so much heart and joy, as well as just more diving into the backstory and world building. There's really not much else to say. That this episode is just a breath of fresh air and is just so enjoyable to watch that there's really nothing wrong with it. Honestly, this is a perfect episode that encapsulates heart, emotion, and in a way, despite some restrictions from Hasbro, is able to come up with something that it can work around. That I think kids might be able to understand. So, yeah, that's why I've made it very clear that this is without a doubt the best episode of Season 7, because there's honestly really nothing wrong with it. There's not one thing about this episode that I can really find or even nitpick. It is that good. It is a perfect episode. So with that, I don't know if I can even call this a rating, but we're just going to have to go with Modern Sonic in this one, and I'm just going to say that The Perfect Pair, it is an S-rank episode. It is God tier. I don't think I've ever really gave an episode that rating in the past 7 seasons I reviewed this episode. I mean, the highest I've given is an A+, and I think now that I think about it, if I was going to redo rankings, then I think episodes like Crusaders of the Lost Mark, A Canterlot Wedding, Cutie Mark Chronicles, Twilight's Kingdom especially get those high marks. But yeah, I think honestly, as a whole, the Perfect Pear, at the time of this recording, and even doing these reviews, if I ever decide to re-review them again, the Perfect Pear is an S-rank episode. It is God tier. It is fantastic. It is phenomenal. I really don't know what else to say. It is a great, fantastic episode that I really think you should watch. So yeah, that was the best episode of Season 7, and the episode that premiered on my birthday. It's like I've been getting so much. It was pretty much like a big, joyous birthday gift for, I think it was my 20th birthday when this episode came out. Alright. So now that we're done with that, we're now about halfway through Season 7. And next time we're going to be looking at Fame and Misfortunate. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.